The ancient Egyptians were very sophisticated and complex people in many aspects of their life, including architecture, burial rites, religious practices, and communication methods. Their accomplishments were widely known and respected because of their intricacy and complexity in many aspects of their lives. While researching the things that the Egyptians are most well known for and their major highlights, the first thing that I think of is the Egyptian pyramids. In many ways, pyramids are the symbol of Egyptians. They represent their intelligence and ability to truly show that they were, in a way, ahead of their time. But why are pyramids so important? From the beginning of the dynastic era, royal tombs were carved into rock and covered with flat-roofed rectangular structures known as mastabas, which were precursors to the pyramids. The oldest known pyramid in Egypt was built around 2630 BC at Saqqara for the 3rd dynasty's King Djoser, known as the Step Pyramid. Over the course of Djoser's nearly 20-year reign, pyramid builders assembled 6 stepped layers of stone that eventually reached a height of 204 feet. It was the tallest building of its time. The Step Pyramid was surrounded by a complex of courtyards, temples, and shrines, which Djoser could enjoy his afterlife at. The most popular pyramids, widely celebrated and recognized, are the Great Pyramids of Giza, located on the plateau of the Nile River on the outskirts of modern-day Cairo. The oldest and largest of the 3 pyramids at Giza, known as the Great Pyramid, is the only surviving structure out of the 7 famed wonders of the world. It was built for Pharaoh Khufu. The sides of the pyramid's base averaged 755 feet, and its original height was 481 feet, making it the largest pyramid in the world. The 3 small pyramids, built for Khufu's queens, are lined up next to the Great Pyramid, and the tomb was found nearby containing the empty sarcophagus of his mother, Queen Hetepheres. Like other pyramids, Khufu's is surrounded by rows of mastabas, where relatives or officials of the king were buried to accompany and support him in the afterlife. A second thing that Egyptians are well known for is their burial rites and their beliefs about the afterlife. The main way that Egyptians were buried and preserved was through mummification. Mummification was practiced in Egypt as early as 3500 BC and is thought to have been suggested by the preservation of corpses buried in the arid sand. The Egyptian concept of soul, which may have been developed quite early, dictated that there needed to be a preserved body on earth in order for the soul to have hope of eternal life. There were 3 levels of quality and corresponding prices in Egyptian burial, and the professional embalmers would offer all 3 choices to the bereaved. Even the poorest Egyptian was given some kind of ceremony, as it was thought that if the deceased were not properly buried, the soul would return in the form of a ghost to haunt the living. Ghosts were considered a very real and serious threat, and grieving families were often hard-pressed to afford the kind of funerary rites which the morticians advertised as the best in keeping the soul of the deceased happy and the surviving family members ghost-free. As mummification could be very expensive, the poor gave their used clothing to the embalmers to be used in the wrapping of the corpse. The poor were buried in simple graves with those artifacts they enjoyed in life, or what other objects the family could afford to part with. Every grave contained some sort of provisions for the afterlife. Tombs in Egypt were originally simple graves dug in the earth, which then developed into rectangular mastabas, more ornate graves, and then eventually built into step pyramids. And then true pyramids. These tombs became increasingly important as Egyptian civilization advanced, in that they would be the eternal resting place of the body, and that physical form needed to be protected from grave robbers and the elements. After the tomb was sealed, the mourners would celebrate the life of the departed with a feast, usually held right beside the grave. When the party was done, the people would return to their homes and resume their lives, but the soul of the departed was thought to be just starting out on the next phase of their eternal journey. The soul would wake in the tomb, be reassured of instructions of texts inside the sarcophagus and walls, and rise to be guided by the god Anibius to the Hall of Truth, where their heart would be weighed against the white feather of goddess Mot. Here I have a short video on mummification to reiterate what I just talked about.
Mummification, ancient Egypt. The ancient Egyptians believed in several rituals in order to reach the afterlife, into the next world, and achieve immortality. Death was seen as a temporary state, and a dead person's spirit needed a body. So to preserve it, a process of mummification was used. This process and quality of the mummification varied depending on the person's status and wealth. The highest ranks in society got the best method of preservation after they died. Firstly, the body was washed in water and salt. The brain was then removed and discarded, using a hook through the nostrils. The body was then slit open and the organs were removed, except for the heart, which the ancient Egyptians believed would guide the person into the afterlife. The liver, lungs, intestines, and stomach were kept and placed in 4 canopic jars, one for each organ. These jars each featured a lid sculpted as one of the sons of Horus: Hapi, who protected the lungs; Duamutef, the stomach; Imseti, the liver; and Qebessonef, the intestines. The body was then filled with myrrh, cassia, and other spices, then sewn up together and packed with a special salt called natron for up to 70 days, which prevented the flesh from rotting. After this process, the body was shriveled and dehydrated, so the embalmers would stuff the empty body with sawdust and linen to bring it back to its original shape, oil the skin to soften it, and add false eyes and a wig to make the corpse more lifelike. A resin was used to cover the body to prevent mold, and then the whole corpse was wrapped in layers of linen bandages. A face mask was made to look like the person, then was placed on the head of the corpse, and the body was placed into a wooden case, or if the person were rich, a stone sarcophagus. Mummies would be buried with items they might have needed for the afterlife, including jewelry, clothes, furniture, even pet cats and dogs who were mummified as well to keep them company. The less expensive method for the middle classes, or those who wish to avoid the expense, involved the corpse being injected with oil taken from cedar trees, liquefying the internal organs. It was then packed with natron for up to 70 days and given back to the family. The Egyptian embalmers were so skilled that even today, people that were mummified thousands of years ago still have some recognizable features.
So as you can see from the video, mummification was a very complicated method for the embalmers. Maat was the goddess of truth, justice, balance, and most importantly, order. In paintings, she was depicted as a woman who's either sitting or standing with an ostrich feather on her head, and in some cases, she was depicted with wings. However, Maat was more than just a goddess to the ancient Egyptians. She represented the crucial concept of how the universe was maintained. The ancient Egyptians believed the universe had an order to it, and it was Maat who kept everything in balance. This helped the ancient Egyptians develop a strong sense of morality and justice. Maat was extremely important in achieving the afterlife. So according to the ancient Egyptian mythology, after the death of the body, everyone had to pass through the Hall of Judgment, where a person's heart was weighed on the scale against Maat's feather of truth. If the deceased person's heart balanced with Maat's feather, they could continue their journey to the afterlife. If not, their journey ended. This influenced the daily actions of the ancient Egyptians. Even if one had an exemplary life, however, one would not reach paradise if one's body had not been properly buried and all the funerary rites followed in accordance with tradition. It's for this reason that proper burial rites were so important and were so strictly observed. A third thing that the ancient Egyptians are famous for is their hieroglyphics. The word hieroglyphics refers to the method of writing used by ancient Egyptian. Hieroglyphics involved a series of symbols, or hieroglyphs, which are pictures of the words or sounds. With over 700 ancient Egyptian symbols in the hieroglyphic alphabet, representing actual words and thousands of others used for individual sounds, it was a very complicated and labor-intensive system to use. Because of their pictorial elegance, Herodotus and other important Greek gods believed that hieroglyphics were something sacred, so they referred to them as holy writing. Thus, the word hieroglyph comes from the Greek word hiero, or holy, and glypho for writing. The first hieroglyphics were used mainly by the priests to record important events like wars and stories about their many gods and pharaohs. There were They were also used to decorate temples and tombs. It's believed that the ancient Egyptians first began developing the hieroglyphic system around 3000 BC, but it eventually fell into disuse around 391 AD, because of the Byzantine Empire closing pagan temples. The skill necessary to temple hieroglyphics was then lost until some 1,500 years later, when Jean-Francis Champollion discovered the Rosetta Stone, a tablet on which the same text was inscribed in 3 languages. This trilingual inscription made it possible to decipher hieroglyphics because it contained a parallel text in a known language, Greek. Hieroglyphics were written in rows or columns, which could be read in either direction. The direction in which the text should be read can be distinguished as the human or animal figures always faced towards the beginning of the line. Hieroglyphics used no vowels consisting of only consonants, nor was there any form of punctuation or spacing used. The vast majority of the ancient Egyptians were unable to read or write and depended on scribes and priests to render words into hieroglyphics. Young boys from wealthy families were taught to read and write from a very early age. And due to the complexity of the system, it took many years of training to become a scribe. Once fully trained, however, the position of a scribe was highly regarded and brought with many benefits, including exemption from taxes and military service. Eventually, hieroglyphics were changed and became used on a daily level among the Egyptians. The daily used hieroglyphs were less complex and were written on papyrus, right here, as the ancient written documents used for potions, medical procedures, medicines, recipes, and many other forms of history among the people. While there are many more examples of popular practices and symbols among the great Egyptian people, even just catching a glimpse of the major accomplishments of pyramids, hieroglyphics, and burial rites, it is clear to see that the long reign of Egyptian civilization was because of their constant achievements and complex way of life that proved their dominance in the ancient world. Even today, looking at the history of Egyptians, historians are still amazed by their ability to make such a major impact on the world they lived in with their many well-known ways of culture and ways of life.